Hello and welcome to Living Word, Scripture and Tradition, brought to you by your Catholic friends and neighbors of the Diocese of Biloxi. I'm Father Joe Dilettuso, your host. As you know, we've been going through the Ten Commandments and taking an in-depth look at them with the help of Father Al McBride's book, The Ten Commandments. And he suggested at the beginning of the book, and as I suggested all through this series, that actually while we can look at the various stipulations, the various commandments as they are written, there actually are values which are behind those commandments that actually provide a context in which that commandment makes a lot more sense. So, for instance, the last time we were together, we were looking at the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, and I suggested to you, along with Father McBride, that the positive value behind that is a respect for life, that life is such a precious commodity that we have to have an overall respect for it, and of course, the greatest degradation of that value would be actually taking human life. We come today then to the sixth commandment, which we have all learned as, again, in a negative way, you shall not commit adultery. Now I suppose you would imagine at this point, as you have heard other preachers and ministers in the past, that I would go into some long explanation and tirade against all sort of sexual immorality and all sort of abuses of the great gift of sexuality that God has given us, because after all, isn't that what the sixth commandment is about? It says very clearly, you shall not commit adultery. And that leaves itself open for that kind of a presentation. And while, of course, the negative implications of disrespecting our sexuality are something that need to be taken into account, once again, let us take the approach that Father McBride takes, and that is, rather than right away beginning with that negative injunction of what we're not supposed to do, let's look behind that to the value that is incorporated into that commandment. The one, of course, that Father McBride suggests, and I would wholeheartedly agree, that lies behind the sixth commandment, the value, the positive value that sets the whole context and perspective of that commandment, is the value of faithfulness or fidelity. That in a sense, the sixth commandment doesn't have anything so much to do directly with sexuality as it does have to do with being faithful, being a faithful person. And of course, immediately in our day and age and in our culture, we come into some kind of conflict when we start looking at the value of faithfulness. For don't we live in a country and at a time where litigation and suits are just almost part of our daily lives, where people are always looking for loopholes, how to get out of things, where we hear the old-timers say to us, whatever happened to the days where a man's word was his bond, you could count on somebody, when he said something, he'd follow through, and that would be the way it was. Now we live in a time where we're always hearing all the time in the newspapers, we see it in our own lives, we're always sort of not going wholeheartedly into anything. We hold something back. We give ourselves an avenue of escape just in case things don't work out. So when we talk about the value of faithfulness, of fidelity, it almost sounds a little tinny to our ear. Maybe we shouldn't be so surprised then that we find the state of marriage in such disarray in our own particular country. If, as Father McBride suggests, the value underlying all of marriage is this notion of faithfulness or fidelity. So let's explore that idea of faithfulness before we actually look at the commandment itself. What's incorporated there? Well, what it's really trying to say is that we need to have, that there's a sacredness to the human person. And you can see how that's a natural follow-up of the fifth commandment, which has a respect for life. That life is not just a commodity, but it's actually a divine gift. That there's a sacredness, a mystery to life that needs to be respected and needs to be approached with a sense of awe. That we are not totally in control or totally responsible for life. God has a part to play in that. And so we approach any life, but especially human life, with a sense of reverence and respect. You can automatically see then how this doubles and triples in effect when you start talking about people who commit themselves or promise to be with one another forever and ever in a marriage commitment. So faithfulness then is what we want to look at. And actually in our century, we in a sense have come to a deeper appreciation of just how sacred and just how that mystery of the human personality works through the advent of modern psychology. Now, I don't want to give the impression that philosophers have not always studied human nature and what we're composed of and how we're made up. The Greek philosophers, the great philosophers of the East, our own Christian philosophers, St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, for instance, have always tried to plumb the depths of what makes human life, what makes us unique in all of God's creation. But I think in our own day and age, because of the advent of modern psychology, we've come to some deeper awarenesses and appreciations of just who we are that really have revolutionized our understanding not only of human nature, but of how interdependent we are with one another for a sense of who we are. I suppose there have been many philosophers who have helped us understand that, and psychologists, but the one I think who is sort of the classical study was actually a rabbi, a Jewish philosopher by the name of Martin Buber. And some 3 or 4 decades ago, he wrote a book called I, Thou. What he basically says is that in conjunction with all the studies that have gone on and have corroborated this, that the way I discover who I am is by my interrelatedness. Now, the great philosophers always said human beings are social animals. We've always known that. But we never appreciated how deep is our need for other people and our interrelatedness and relatedness to all of other earth and all other things in earth for us to understand and appreciate our own gifts and talents. We see, for instance, what happens, for instance, to a baby. If that baby is put in isolation and has no human contact, is sort of kept almost anesthetized from anything else in its environment, that baby will literally die. And out of those kind of studies and studies by other great philosophers and psychologists, we've come to a deeper appreciation of how dependent we are for a sense of who we are, of our own worth in having relationships with one another. Martin Buber divided all of our human interactions into 2 categories. He said, first of all, we have relationships with other things around us, and he called that an I-it kind of a relationship. So that, for instance, that I look at this book, it's an inert object, and I relate to it. There's really no interrelatedness insofar as there's anything that the book does for me. I relate to it, as it were. It puts a certain barrier to me. It presents a certain thing that I have to deal with in my immediate environment. And there's a sort of, through doing that, I learn my own limitations. I learn something about my environment. But by far, the most far-reaching relationships for human beings are the relationships we have with one another. And those Martin Buber calls I-thou relationships. That is, that I only really discover who I am by, as it were, bouncing myself off of other human beings. I only come to appreciate who I am in relating to them and seeing how they see me. They, as it were, feed back to me who I am. And without that kind of communication, I remain even a mystery to myself. That's the kind of tremendous insight that Martin Buber brought to our understanding of human personality and of our need for one another. But there's another side of that. Although there's a mystery that I am, and I want to know who that is, there's also a side of me that maybe I want to keep hidden from you. Maybe because I don't fully understand it myself. Maybe because I'm ashamed of it, or I'm not sure that if you know that about me, you'll accept me as I am. So that there's always that desire, as it were, to present a front to you, to sort of keep you a little bit at a distance. In fact, that's one of the great revelations of adolescence and infatuation and early teenage romance, when we find out that another human being actually likes us, actually finds us worthwhile, actually wants to be with us. That's such an exhilarating experience. Well, you know what happens to teenagers when they fall in love. That's a tremendous insight for them, that as they're growing up, all of a sudden for the first time, they find out, hey, I'm worth something to somebody. Somebody actually appreciates me, not for what I do, but for who I am. They want me because of who I am. It's not because they're my parents and they sort of have to take care of me. It's not because they're my brothers and sisters and sort of we can't help being together. This person actually chooses to be with me. And so that relationship then begins to unfold in all of our relationships with one another. We begin to learn who we are. Well, that leads then, of course, to what we're talking about today. That's why, for instance, fidelity, promising to be with one another, is such an important step. Because when I finally choose someone and say to this, that from now on, I am going to know who I am through my relationship with this person. And that person says back to me, mutually for me too, that there could have been a lot of people in this world that I could have chosen to spend the rest of my life for, to discover myself through. But of all those, I chose you. And I always stop here when I'm talking with couples who are thinking of getting married, and I say, now, if you think that there aren't other people in this world that you could have married successfully and had a very happy life with, you're really mistaken. That there's no perfect person in this world for each of us. That there are many people that I could have thrown my lot in with, so to speak. But what makes marriage so unique is that of all of those people, I make the conscious choice. I make the promise that although there are other people that I could have been happier with and perhaps learned other things about myself that I wouldn't know through this person, I choose this person, and this person chooses me. That is, we choose one another not just with our strengths and our abilities and our talents, but also with our weaknesses. What makes marriage marriage is not that two perfect people come together, but that two imperfect people come together and say to one another, in spite of that, I choose you. What makes this marriage is not that we're perfect for one another, but that we will grow in spite of our imperfections, one with another. And so you see the importance then of that kind of permanent promise and of being faithful to it. That if I reveal myself to you, as a married couple does over the period of their lives, if they take the deepest, darkest secrets of themselves, their deepest doubts about themselves, the mysteries, the parts of themselves that they don't really like about themselves, and they share that with one another, and then that person walks away, what that does for me is it shatters my own image, my own perception of who I am. You probably know people, for instance, who have gone through divorces. And what usually happens to people who go through divorces? Quite often, they get into all sorts of strange behavior. And people say, why are they acting that way? The reason is that it's sort of like a person being thrown into the ocean. They're floundering. They've lost their underpinnings. They're grasping for anything they can to once again get a focus on who they are. And so they'll reach out to anything or anyone around them, trying, as it were, to get their legs under them again so that they can go on with their lives. The wisdom of the sixth commandment is that broken promises often lead to broken lives. We see that from our own experience. We see that as counselors, as priests, as ministers. How often people who are in what they consider to be impossible situations, and many of them are impossible situations, marriages which really can't go on because there's so much negativity and there's so much damage that's being done to the human persons involved. But yet these people somehow think that if they can just get out of this relationship, everything will take care of itself, everything will be better. And I constantly, and I know others do the same, have to warn people and say, look, this may be something necessary, your divorce. It may be a necessary thing, but please don't think it's a good thing. Please don't think that somehow that this is a magic elixir that's going to cure all of the problems, all of the pains and the anxieties that you've been feeling. That, in a sense, a part of you is going to die. And I very often say to people, you are going to go through a death experience. You are going to go through some of the very same stages that psychologists and therapists tell us many people go through when they lose a loved one. There will be anger, there will be resentment, there will be depression, there will be bargaining, there will be all these sorts of things as a person tries to deal with the part of themselves that have died, the part of themselves that they learned through this other person that they no longer are able to get a hold of because that person is no longer in their lives. So that's really why the wisdom of the sixth commandment is that we shouldn't commit adultery. We should not go back on our promises. We should be faithful people. Let me step over here to the board so that maybe I can kind of diagram this and show then how that leads into our understanding of why aberrant sexual behavior is something also, in addition to adultery, which is not allowed by the sixth commandment. Faithfulness, fidelity, then, is the value, and that expresses itself in two ways. First of all, it's not just a matter of somehow being a slave to a promise, but it's understanding that it's in this commitment to one another, this mutual sharing that is done in love, that there's a mutual giving one to the other that protects, as it were, or strengthens the promise, the faithfulness that a couple has to one another. But also, faithfulness to one another, love and sharing with one another, automatically draws itself towards producing something. It wants to not only give to one another in a selfish kind of way, but it looks to sort of, as it were, rise above the two people and produce something, bring something into existence. And so, of course, in our Catholic Christian faith, we always talk about procreation. That is, that this love bond, this mutual giving of two people to one another automatically wants to take itself towards something that it creates, that it will produce out of this love that the couple have for itself. And so in our Catholic understanding and morality, we've always seen then that in marriage, the two purposes, the two ends of it, are first of all the drawing together, the mutual strengthening of this faithful bond between the married couple, and at the same time, this urge to produce. And of course, the obvious example of that is through children, through procreating, working with the Creator, procreation, working with the Creator to bring something greater out of this bond than either of the individuals alone could have done by themselves. We see then that in this we have kind of a whole unit, a holistic approach. And this is where we get to the area of sexuality, because this mutual giving is best and most symbolically expressed when it is done in a loving relationship between two people through their sexual sharing with one another, in all ways that they share with one another sexually. And this is something we have to stop and look at too, because we have to understand, where does our sexuality come from? Is this something which needs to be valued? Is it something which needs to be apologized for? And in the history of Christianity, there have been various approaches to that. We know, for instance, there has been a strain going all the way back, even before Christianity, of looking at our sexuality as some kind as an evil thing. It's somehow a part of this earthly part of us that somehow is affected by sin, and we sort of tolerate it, but it really doesn't have any place or value in someone who's really a, quote, holy person. I don't know how people come up with that when they read Scripture, because when you read in the first chapters of Genesis, when God creates Adam and Eve, He gives them to one another, and He says, procreate, create, go out and populate the earth. He doesn't do that as a kind of a punishment to them. He does that as He sees something. This is why He created them the way they are, male and female. And this is why a man leaves his father and mother, and the two become one flesh, so that they can continue creating the earth that God began in His creation at the beginning of time. So sexuality itself is something which is a gift of God. It should not be seen as something which is bad. On the other hand, at the other extreme, you might say, is the idea of saying, well, yes, not only is it a gift, but it's the greatest gift, and therefore it should have no discipline to it at all. Just simply go with the urge, go with the impulse. Anything is allowable, anything is permissible. Well, that would be the other end, extreme, which just simply talks about promiscuity. That is, it's so good that you can do it any time. It's an impulse you should follow. You should have no control, no discipline over it. I think the wisdom of the Sixth Commandment says that sexuality is a very good part of our creation. It's something which has its place, but that's exactly the point. It has its place. It's like all other impulses we have, that we need to discipline, that we need at times to make sure that we use and treat in a respectful way and in its proper context. And so the Sixth Commandment then sets the context for the proper use of our sexuality. Our sexuality is neither bad, but neither is it something which just simply has free reign over us. That would sort of put us back to the area of kind of an animalistic approach to it. We are human beings. We have the ability to reflect. That's one of the great insights of Martin Buber. We are not only people who know, but we are people who know that we know. We can reflect on our behavior, our activities. We can intentionally change our activities. We don't have to be at the beck and whim of every one of our impulses. And so this impulse, too, has a proper context for us. And the Sixth Commandment then outlines for us what that context is. We come then to the commandment itself in this perspective, which says, you shall not commit adultery. Because I suppose that becomes the paramount aberration of mutual loving faithfulness that is put to a nurturing community so that children may have the kind of atmosphere they need to grow and mature and grow into the people God intended them. That giving a promise to someone that I am for you and I will always be here for you, and then going off for someone else is in a sense breaking my word, breaking my promise. More importantly, as importantly, it's also then, as it were, pulling the rug out from my partner, from that person I've given that promise to. it's sort of throwing them back into the chaos of them trying to figure out who they are. Because whereas I had promised that I would always be with them to help them appreciate that and share that and honor that, now I go off and I give something, I give my attention, I give my concern to someone else. So of course adultery becomes then the example of how we break the value of fidelity. But if you stop and think of it, anything that has to do with an aberration or a misuse and an abuse of our sexuality also then tears down at the very fiber of what our sexual union should be and cheapens it. Or to use Martin Buber's phrase, instead of it being a relationship between two self-conscious egos, two people who are working one with the other, I begin to treat other people as a thing, as an object. I begin to manipulate them sexually. And anytime I do that, I am cheapening the very beauty of the sexuality that God gave me. So, for instance, if fornication has always been seen as an aberration, as an attack upon the sixth commandment, because it's doing something, promising something without the promise of faithfulness, without the possibility that I am going to give myself unreservedly. It's engaging in sexual activity that does not have that promise, that commitment to be with this person on a permanent basis. We can stop and think of prostitution, for instance. I suppose there isn't a better example of turning a person into an object, or at least treating a person as an object, and in prostitution. I, even in my mind, start to think of this person as a thing, as an object. We even use the word a sexual object. A terrible phrase when you stop to think of it. And so prostitution then becomes a tearing away at the sixth commandment. Think, for instance, of pornography. Again, objectifying people for our own pleasure, not respecting the worth, the value of this human person that I'm manipulating or watching be manipulated for my own self-gratification. I suppose a terrible one, which even adds to the aberration of this, would be rape itself, which objectifies a person and then adds violence on top of it, so that we almost doubly denigrate a human being. We tear at the sacredness of human life in a double sort of sense of way. You can then start to see how all of these aberrations of our legitimate sexual expression begin to tear down at that value of faithfulness. It tears away at our ability, first of all, to take seriously how human beings grow, how we learn who we are, how we discover our value and our worth, and as importantly, how we find in this world which bombards us so often, in which we feel so insecure and unstable at times, how we find kind of a haven, a place where we can be at peace, where we know we're accepted the way we are, and we accept others the way they are, where we don't have to constantly be on guard, where I've given my pledge, I've given my promise to someone that no matter what happens, no matter what I discover about you, or what you discover about me, nothing will ever be able to turn me against you or turn you against me. And as I said, we were talking about divorce before. No commandment can ever be taken in isolation. And we know that because of human sinfulness, there are situations where separation or annulments, for instance, or civil divorces must take place because there is so much damage and harm being done. But as I said before, that can never be looked upon as the ideal, as something normal, as something which is good. And study after study has demonstrated that I suppose the one that Father McBride points to is as good as any. It was a 15-year study of children who were the products of divorces, done by a Judith Wallerstein, called Second Choices. And the conclusions that she came to after studying children of divorces, 2/3 of them felt that they had been rejected by one of their parents, in spite of the protestations of their parents or whatever their parents said to them. The vast majority of them felt that there was warring going on between their parents after the divorce was over, and that they were caught in the middle. 2/3 of the girls, when they grew up, had very difficult time making commitments and always were leery of being betrayed. And most of the boys didn't seem to have a sense of purpose. They drifted in and out of colleges, drifted in and out of jobs. That's just one study among so many that we can point to about what happens when we begin to take apart this value of faithfulness that the sixth commandment protects for us, especially in this area of loving relationships, of commitment, of making promises that we stand behind, and saying, yes, I know I'm not perfect, I know you're not perfect, I don't know what the future is going to bring, there will be all kinds of pressures, but we pledge to work together on this relationship. And I suppose that might be the final thing we need to say about that a relationship like this is not something that just sort of comes into existence on a wedding day, for instance. The marriage encounter people, the engaged encounter people have a saying. They say, a wedding is for a day, a marriage is for a lifetime. That yes, the beginning of that relationship, of that promise, in a very powerful way, is made at the wedding ceremony. But then the whole attitude of the people must be that from now on, we will begin to nurture and nourish one another in our commitment to one another. We will search out and help one another search out and strengthen this bond we have before us. Because, frankly speaking, if two people just sort of say, well, we're married now, and pay no attention to the relationship, you can almost predict that that relationship is not going to survive. There are just too many opposing forces in everyday life that are going to tear at it. They're going to start to erode that commitment, that sense of infatuation, of discovery that we all have at the beginning of any love relationship, that, my goodness, I'm a worthwhile person. Somebody finds me worthwhile. As time goes on, we tend to forget that unless we continue to build on it and put it into practice every day of our lives. So then, this then becomes for us the real understanding, the pivotal perspective we need to have at looking at the sixth commandment, you shall not commit adultery. That it's much more than simply an act of sexual abuse or of aberrant sexuality. It's something which goes to the very heart of who we are as human beings. That we are people who discover one in ourselves through one another. And that we need to make commitments. That we can't sit on the fence, so to speak. We can't hedge our bets and always be ready for loopholes. That we are people who only discover who we are most completely when we are willing to let go of ourselves in a perpetual, a total, and a full relationship with someone, and pledge to do that till the day we die. I'll be looking forward to seeing you the next time we continue our study of the Ten Commandments. This program is a service of the Diocese of Biloxi. Any financial contribution that you would like to make so that it can continue would be greatly appreciated. You can send that contribution to the Office of Communications, the Diocese of Biloxi.